2019 is nearly in the books, but as we prepare for a new year, we pause to remember those who left us over the past 12 months. In this segment, we examine the world of government, politics, world affairs, and business.
Everybody agrees that it's appropriate to do everything you can to understand the original intent behind both statutes and constitutional provisions. But the notion that that can provide the answer in all cases is what is incorrect.
John Paul Stevens was nominated for the Supreme Court by Republican President Gerald Ford in 1975. But for the next 35 years, Stevens was an increasingly reliable vote for the court's liberal faction. Best known for his opinions confronting the George W. Bush administration's power in the wake of 9/11, Justice Stevens was 99 when he died in July.
If you just want to get down to brass tacks, first thing you ought to do is get all these folks who've got these one-way trade agreements that we've negotiated over the years and say, fellas, we'll take the same deal we gave you.
H. Ross Perot was an American original. Born into poverty, Perot quickly struck it rich through his business, Perot Systems, which he eventually sold for a massive profit. Years later, he made headlines for assembling his own private security force to rescue employees held captive in Iran. In 1992, Perot launched an independent presidential bid against incumbent Republican George H.W. Bush and Democrat Bill Clinton. Perot was the last third-party candidate to make the debate stage for the general election, and he received nearly 20 million votes, although he won no states. Perot ran again in 1996, but finished an even more distant third to Clinton and Republican nominee Bob Dole.
I remind my colleagues that the last perfect law came off the top of Mount Sinai with Moses written on a stone tablet by the hand of God. Nothing so good has happened since.
Several lawmakers who spent decades in Washington also passed away this year. No one in American history served more years in the House of Representatives than Michigan's John Dingell. First elected in 1955, Dingell served nearly 60 years before retiring in 2015. Dingell was 92.
This is what is necessary to protect the constitutional prerogatives as a co-equal branch of government in this democracy of ours.
Dingell's fellow Michigan Democrat John Conyers also served more than 50 years representing Detroit. Eventually rising to chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Conyers was 90.
And at some point, reason has to prevail here. And we cannot allow the Tea Party to rule. We just can't afford that. Because all we're doing is cutting off our future.
Elijah Cummings was a sitting congressman representing Baltimore and serving as chairman of the House Oversight Committee. Known for his clashes with Republicans on that panel, as well as forging close relationships with members of both parties, Cummings was 68. Ernest Holling served as governor of South Carolina during the racially charged 1960s and was in office when the Confederate flag began flying over the state capitol there again. In 1966, he was elected to the Senate and served for 38 years, even running unsuccessfully for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1984. Fritz Hollings was 97. Mississippi's Thad Cochran served nearly 39 years in the Senate before retiring due to health issues in 2018. Known most for his work on the Appropriations Committee, Cochran was 81. Indiana lost two former senators in 2019. Republican Richard Lugar served 36 years in the upper chamber before losing a Republican primary in 2012. Known best for his work on foreign affairs, Dick Lugar was 87. Birch Bayh served 3 terms in the U.S. Senate before losing his 1980 re-election fight against a young congressman named Dan Quayle. Bayh also ran for president in 1976 but lost the Democratic nomination to Jimmy Carter. Bayh's son Evan later held the same Senate seat. Birch Bayh was 91. One of the keys to Jimmy Carter's win in the 1976 election was a brilliant young aide named Patrick Cadell. Known for his shrewd analysis of both politics and polls, Cadell was highly critical of his party for drifting too far to the left in his later years. Pat Cadell was 68. Inflation became a major problem in the Carter years, and it took years to get it under control. The man given much of the credit for finally reining it in through painful interest rate hikes is former Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker. Volcker died in December. He was 92. Lyndon LaRouche is dead, or maybe that's just what all the powerful forces out to destroy us want you to think. LaRouche was a presidential candidate for decades who rarely got much attention. One of the most famous conspiracy theorists of his time, LaRouche was 96.
A brutal killer one who has caused so much hardship and death, has violently been eliminated. He will never again harm another innocent man, woman, or child. He died like a dog. He died like a coward. The world is now a much safer place.
On the world stage, ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi wanted to create a caliphate from the Mediterranean Sea to Indonesia. He recruited fighters to his cause and inspired terrorist attacks in many countries, including the attacks in San Bernardino and Orlando here in the United States. Already watching his territorial gains in Iraq and Syria largely evaporate, American forces killed Baghdadi in October. He was believed to be 48 years old. Earlier this decade, the Arab Spring brought Mohammed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood to power in Egypt. Later removed by a military coup, Morsi died in prison in June. He was 67. In the lead-up to the Iraq War, one of the most vocal critics of the impending operation was former Ambassador Joe Wilson, who claimed a key piece of British intelligence was false. Wilson was also married to CIA figure Valerie Plame, who became the centerpiece of a major investigation during the Bush years. Joe Wilson was 69. One of the foreign heads of state leading the opposition to the Iraq War was French President Jacques Chirac. He died in September. He was 86. In business, few leaders symbolize the economic boom of the 1980s like Chrysler's Lee Iacocca. Barely registering a pulse during the economic malaise at the beginning of the decade, Chrysler flourished under Iacocca's leadership and some help from Washington. Iacocca was 94. In the energy industry, there was no bigger name than T. Boone Pickens. The head of Mesa Petroleum, Pickens gained fame in the 1980s for taking over companies like Gulf Oil, Phillips Petroleum, and Unocal. T. Boone Pickens was 91. You'd be hard-pressed to find two more successful brothers in business than the Koch brothers, Charles and David. Through Koch Industries, the Kochs amassed billions of dollars and later became targets for political attacks due to their activism for conservative and libertarian causes. David Koch died in August. He was 79. Herb Kelleher turned Southwest Airlines from a joke into a thriving competitor with rave customer reviews and a model for business leaders in all areas to emulate. Herb Kelleher was 87. Gloria Vanderbilt was born into money and fame but charted her own path of success. Known best for her designer blue jeans and other fashion innovations, Vanderbilt was 95. Jack Bogle brought investing to the common man. His hugely successful Vanguard funds changed the investment business forever, as did his advice to invest for the long haul rather than the quick buck. Jack Bogle was 89. That's a look at the figures we lost in politics and business in 2019. Please look for our remembrances of those who passed away in media and sports, and our feature on the legends of entertainment who died this past year. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.